This video is on fear being the root of all sin, as well as attack proofing, identifying little fear indicators which we should take back to Jesus so that we make sure that we have our whole armor of God on and intact. Now, I've already covered a little bit about fear being the root of all sin in my How to Stop Sinning Through Grace playlist, video number 2. In this video, I explained that there's emotional fear and intellectual fear, and that emotional fear is the fear that we're very familiar with. It's the fear that causes us to feel anxiety, terror, and these kind of things which cause us to defend ourselves, whether we run away or we fight back. Intellectual fear, on the other hand, which is what Jesus called it, this one took me a little bit of time to understand because it wasn't a concept that's usually called fear in this world. Basically, things like envy, greed, and lust, the things that cause us to actually be addicted, is technically a type of fear that affects us intellectually. Usually, this kind of fear harbors around or centered around fear of lacking something, or not having enough of something, or someone else having something that you want. Now, a lot of people wouldn't think of this as being a fear because in the world we usually associate fear with terror and with anxiety and the emotions that feel really bad and cause you to be scared. But when you really think about it, if you see something that someone has that you want, and you sin against them by coveting it and desiring it and lusting after it, the truth is you are afraid of not having that thing. And that can cause us to then hate the person, even kill them, and take that thing from them so that we can have it. And then once we have it, it's very possible that we could end up with the emotional fears of being afraid of losing it. Do you see how that kind of relates and how that intertwines? So that's a really, really quick basic rundown on the two types of fear that Jesus explained to me about. And one other thing to mention is that fear in itself usually circulates around self-preservation in some kind of way that's usually done through self-justified or even self-produced or engineered ways. And Satan, he capitalizes on this. In fact, he's usually the one giving us the suggestion as if it's us. And then we side with it. Now, there are scriptures I can go through giving examples of how fear is seen in the Bible as being the root of people's sins. I do have a video which is called Fear is the Root of All Sin, and it's found in the playlist Sin and the Law, which is the playlist that comes after Sins That Christians Accept. But in this video, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be speaking about some of my own experiences, just a few, and then I'm going to talk about the things I learned about identifying fear. If you can identify when you're being attacked with fear or tempted with fear, if you can discern it and take it to Jesus right away, you're not even going to be coming to the temptation to then even sin. This is absolutely brilliant. In fact, I wish Jesus had taught this to me earlier in my walk, which he kind of did, but he didn't give me the understanding. He had me practicing the principle, but I didn't intellectually understand what it was I was doing until years later. So, with the experiences now, Jesus showed me that when I was struggling with lust and masturbation, I was actually trying to cope with the fear of not being married. Lust, for me, was the fear of not having a wife or the fear of not getting married. Satan would attack me with these kind of thoughts, with doubts and discouragements, and his answer to this fear was to now please myself the way he suggests, which is through sin. This is often how people end up in fornication and adultery or these kinds of sexual sins. Somewhere along the lines, there's some form of fear. Whether it's fear that they're not going to get married, fear that their spouse is not good enough for them, or they don't have the right spouse and they go into adultery and these kind of things. I did not understand this right away when Jesus was showing me that that's what was going on with me, but he did say it. I remember there was a time when I was telling Jesus I wanted to get married, I was lonely and so on, and he basically said I was believing a lie. He told me that I actually didn't want to get married that much, and when he broke down what marriage was, and he explained to me the responsibilities and the things that I needed to learn, and the fact that I didn't want a marriage like all the other marriages I heard about with people getting divorced, when he outlined all this information, I was like, wow, that makes sense. And then when he explained to me that I was actually in training to get married, that these attacks of lust had nothing to do with my actual legitimate process of preparing for marriage, it started making sense. I was being lied to and being told, oh, you're not going to get married, or it's too long, or all these emotions and feelings, and then the answer was to fall into lust. Now, what Jesus did is he showed me why what was going on with me made sense, as in delaying and waiting to marry. He showed me how I was being trained. He showed me what marriage was about. And he showed me that the whole lust factor of what I was being attacked with, that's actually a very small portion of what marriage is. Once that lie was exposed, I was no longer in fear of not getting married because I realized that I was actually preparing for it. And once I believed it, the temptation was gone. That was with lust. I already mentioned the testimony regarding anger, when Jesus basically told me to stop taking it personal, it has nothing to do with me. I was in fear of other people's error and fear that people weren't going to get it, and I was ready to take matters in my own hands, and how I was going to do that was to get upset and yell and lecture and so on, and that wasn't going to help anyone. That's how I wanted to try and fix it, and Jesus told me to relax. And then what he did is he told me what to do to help fix it. So what I started doing was trusting Jesus in how to help people who were in error, who had problems, or whatever the situation was, so I can see them grow and develop that fruit, rather than just getting upset and angry. There had been times when I used to get attacked with jealousies and envies because of personal things that had belonged to me, and Satan was setting up some very, very crafty tricks, crafty schemes to tempt me to fall into these mindsets. People would have dreams, and in the dreams, it was literally like they were dreaming about things that had pertained to myself, but it was being given to them. And I'd get attacked with it. It's like, you're not going to get this, you're not this, you're actually not this, it's a lie, this person's actually this, and you're being lied to, and this person's this, and this person's this. I was being forced into making a decision of falling into pride of either thinking highly of myself, which I really refused to do. So then the next thing was to force me into false humility, where I started degrading myself and thinking of myself as way lower than what I was supposed to. And through doing this, I was opening myself up to a lot of fear regarding other people that Satan tried to target and use as a tool to feed this fear even further. I remember that there were certain conversations that would come up and certain words would pop up and trigger, and I would get gripped, or I'd feel pricks or stings emotionally, and my emotions would get all changed, and I know there would be something wrong, and then I'd be fighting off attacks, and I wouldn't even be able to pay attention in the conversation. And then I'd have to go back in my prayer closet, because if I didn't deal with it, I was going to get attacked repeatedly for days, sometimes weeks. There were times where I was in this slump for months because it had to do with things that pertained to my life. And it was very difficult for me to really find the truth in how to handle this. I mean, this was consistently. And the days when finally things were better, I'd speak to people and like, oh yeah, I had this dream, and in the dream I blah, 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 blah. And instantly I'd get gripped, and it's like, what does this mean? And then I'd become afraid that I misunderstood something about myself, or I misunderstood something that I heard, and then I'd slump right back into the fears and the doubts. And remember, on top of this, I was also dealing with false Christs trying to really mess me over. This was a very difficult season for myself, as well as the rest of my family who was with me at the time. We were all going through these kind of things in various ways. Now, it was with this particular subject, it was the attacks of jealousy / envy / false humility that I was being tempted with. I was living in the false humility, and I was really being tempted with the envies and the jealousies. And it was with this particular subject that Jesus started teaching me about learning how to identify fear and completely nip it by the root, or nip it by the bud. I remember there was a time I was speaking with someone, and I don't remember what they said. I don't even remember the details of the conversation, but they had said something, and I got gripped really, really badly. I couldn't move emotionally. This just locked onto me, and I had fears rising up, questions, confusions. And in this conversation, while the other person was speaking, I just stopped and paused, and then I pulled back and said, hold on a second, no. Let me breathe for a moment. And it was almost like I separated myself from the attack. I realized, okay, this attack is happening, but this isn't me. And this was a technique that Jesus had taught me some time ago in really trying to discern the spirit, in just stopping for a moment and separating ourselves from what's actually happening in the moment and looking at it and examining it. And when I did this, Jesus then showed me that this was an attack of fear, and I just needed to come to him to get truth, and once he gives me the truth, I'll be free of this. So I asked him about it, and he just spoke a word to me, and instantly in the conversation, this is the first time this happened to me, in the conversation, everything just went to peace. This person was able to speak and say whatever. It didn't matter whether they're speaking truth or lies. If Satan had set them up unknowingly to come and say all this stuff to spiritually attack me or whatever, it didn't matter anymore. I was fully guarded. I just got a word from Jesus, and I was good. Now, I went back to Jesus regarding this, and Jesus then explained to me that this is called attack proofing. That we can actually come to a place where Jesus trains us in a way of living where attacks bounce off of us, they get deflected off of us. If they don't even touch us, that you don't even have to think or worry about those ones. But the ones that come at us, that actually would hit us, or the target actually hits the mark, they just bounce off. Or we can dodge because we see it coming. And what Jesus did here is he showed me a list of different types of manifestations of how fear appears, or how we can feel it when specific attacks come that come to rob us. In attack proofing, Jesus explained to me that the goal is really to just maintain our peace, our joy, and our righteousness, and the rest of the fruit of the Spirit. Jesus had explained to a brother of mine, he actually showed it to him in a dream for someone else, that the armor of God is just simply the right attitude. It's made up of the right attitudes. I had never heard this before, although Jesus had already taught me that attitude is a really big deal. If you want to discern what spirit you're operating under, all you have to do is just check your attitude. If you check your attitude, if you're in a bad attitude, you're in a bad spirit, chances are you're going to end up going along the ways of sin. If you're walking in the right attitude, the Holy Spirit, you're going to be manifesting the fruit of the Spirit. Now, the armor of God, it guards us from fear and all these things that come with fear that try to destroy us and rob us of our fruit and ultimately kill us with sin. If our armor is breached, or we're missing a piece of armor, we feel it. Spiritually, we feel it. A lot of people don't realize this. It goes over their head, but this is part of the reason why we have emotions. And we also physically feel these sensations when something's not entirely right, or something hits us, or grips us, or grabs us, or pricks us. These are indicators that happen so that we can know there's something wrong. And Jesus started teaching me about these things, and I'm going to list a few of them here. Actually, I'm going to be listing several of them here. Because fear has a variety of different types of manifestations. It's not just one. And it's good to have a good idea of some of them. So I'm going to go through some of these guys here. Not for the purpose for you to memorize it and sit here and study it. I know sometimes people like to do this stuff. I mean, if Jesus leads you to do that, go ahead. But the point of why I'm actually going to list these things is just to get your mind thinking along the lines of past times where you may have experienced these kinds of things, and then seeing if you can relate to what I'm speaking about here with these things happening, and then things start kind of going downhill in certain situations that you may have been in the past. And if you can relate with it, then it makes a lot of sense to go back, pray, and ask Jesus about it, so Jesus can start showing you how to identify these things and be sensitive to them, and then how to deal with them on the spot. So you don't even have to be concerned about the follow-up temptations and the follow-up scars, wounds, and even sin. Now, first I'm going to mention two good, very light feelings that you may feel if an attack comes and you're in a good position. They all have names, and I even drew pictures. When I first learned about this, I even drew little pictures and had associations with them. Some of them resembled animals and different types of stuff just to help me remember them. And in fact, it's probably spiritually true, because I've seen some of these things in the spiritual realms. Now, with the good ones, the two major ones that you really want to be looking out for just to make sure that you are in a good position. The first one I call dodge and deflect. This is when an attack comes, you see it coming, and because Jesus goes ahead of us, so you could see it, you can already obey or just trust Jesus and maneuver and completely dodge the attack. Or you could just hold that shield of faith up, or you could just stand there and it could just bounce off of you and you don't feel very much of anything. You realize that was an attack, but whatever. And you're good to go. There's no other side effects. There's no other after effects. You're perfectly fine because you're abiding in Christ and you're in the whole armor of God. You're in the right attitude and you're totally safeguarded within Jesus. The next one, however, is one that you should really look out for, because it's possible that you could get something that I call a prick, which is just a very, very light feeling where you know something's wrong here, but there are no immediate effects. Oftentimes this happens with people, they miss it, and then later on down the road, they've been affected spiritually and emotionally and mentally, and they have no idea where it started. Or they'll have a light idea where it started, and they don't know where to go from there. So definitely try and look out for these pricks. To give you an example, it's like someone comes and says something to you, and you realize, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. What's up with this? Or is this actually true? Or, there's something up. You know, that very light feeling. Oftentimes, there's times where I used to get those, and I used to ignore them, and then later on I would find out, oh man, this is actually a conviction. Because essentially that's what it is. And if we jump on it, we can pray and ask Jesus about it. We can get a truth. We can get some kind of wisdom that can guard us from any future issues or even present issues. Now, I'm going to go through the list of bad manifestations. This is where we're either missing armor or it was just a really, really heavy attack that caused some serious damage. Usually when we feel these, this means we're missing something, and the answer is to just go back to Jesus to find out, okay, why did I get hit like this? Why did I end up feeling like this? Okay? So with these guys here, the way to handle it is if you get hit with something like this, you need to go back to Jesus and say what's wrong. The first one in this list is what I'd call a ram attack. It's like a prick, but it's a lot stronger. It's a hard hit. I had a situation where a sister had said something, and I felt a boom just hit me. It's like, oh. And the reason why was because what she had said challenged something that I already knew. And when I felt this hard hit, it passed very quickly, and I realized, okay, I'm fine, everything's okay. It makes sense, like, I can see how this works, I already know what's for me, and so on. But here's the problem with ram attacks. They have the ability to crack your armor. And if your armor's cracked, that leaves you open for attacks later on, and you wouldn't even realize. I had this ram attack after Jesus had started teaching me about this, and I literally experienced what I just told you about. I'm going to come to that attack later on, the follow-up attack later on. But know that ram attacks, once you feel that, do go back to Jesus, ask him about it. Don't just think, okay, I'm fine because everything feels like it's okay. You could have been damaged and didn't realize. The next attack I would think is a very common attack, because I've noticed people usually use that kind of terminology within my social circle. It's something that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I've used it a few times already in this video. It's called a grip. With the grip, it's kind of like the ram, not as hard, but what's characteristic about this particular attack is that it's consistent. It holds you in an emotional state, and it's really, really hard to shake off. It also takes your attention off of what you should be focusing on, and it's almost like you've been constricted, bound emotionally, and it's just you're kind of stuck in this position trying to figure out what's going on, and it leaves you open to more fear attacks. It actually leaves you pretty vulnerable. Again, if you feel this, you need to go back to Jesus and ask him what's going on. What lies are you believing? Any truth you need? Something to patch up your armor or to get you loose so you are not staying in this state. Because you can stay in this state for months. Now the next one is a sting/bite. This one, I drew this one out more like a scorpion as well as a serpent. The reason why is this is a very, very sharp, quick anger strike, which causes us to quickly rise up in anger, and it's often associated with pride. With this particular attack, not only is it as sharp a spike of anger, but it also has an aftervenom sometimes, which can cause that paralyzing gripping feeling later on. So it's the sharp anger and then a gripping feeling of being locked in this particular emotional state. Again, if we feel this, there's something up with our armor, we need to go back to Jesus. This next one I'm going to mention is one of the things I was talking about when I said with the ram how you can have after effects. This one is a harassment effect. It's almost like flies swarming you. With this particular attack of fear, it's basically just thoughts, whether they're obsessions where you want to think about it, or oppressive where you don't want to think of the thoughts, and they just harass you and harass you and harass you. It becomes extremely difficult to even try thinking about something else. Even if you want to move off of the subject, the thoughts just sit there and hammer away and hammer away and hammer away and hammer away. These attacks can actually come through cracked armor. The next attack is very similar. This is a gas attack. The gas attack is super similar. The difference here is, instead of it being a bombardment of thoughts and an oppression or obsession over particular thoughts in the mind, the gas attack is an emotional harassment. It has fewer intellectual thoughts, but has a lot more harassment of feelings of sadness or depression or anger or uneasiness. And again, this can enter in through cracks and be like a foul stench in the back of our mind, harassing us over subjects. So with the situation I told you about earlier, when I got hit with the ram attack, it was hours later, all of a sudden, I was just starting to get harassments regarding this subject. All of a sudden, they just started bothering me again, and it was much later. The next one is the doubt pricks. These guys are like little mosquitoes. In fact, that's the best way to even think about them. These guys feel like a prick, but they start sucking away your confidence. They start sucking away your faith, leading you into doubt and unbelief. They also can attack with other attacks. So let's say you get a grip or you get a ram or something like that. These guys can come in and start sucking away on your faith. What's also very interesting about these guys is that they're very similar to mosquitoes in the way where sometimes you won't even feel a prick at all. All of a sudden you just start feeling the depletion of your faith, or that your faith is just a lot lower. The next attack is like the doubt pricks, but a lot stronger and a lot bigger. It's the hole attack. It's almost like a sinkhole. With this one, when something happens, it basically sucks us dry of our faith, of our peace, and all the good things concerning the subject at hand. This thing destroys our foundations, it robs the person, and it results in an instant change of mind concerning the person's standing on the subject at hand. Here's an example. I've had situations where people have come and talked to me, they brought up a subject that was really sore for me. I got hit so hard that I just said, forget it, I'm done. And just literally changing my mind from the subject, putting it away, pushing it far away as possible. All faith, all peace, everything on that subject just sinks away, gone, and then I'll just sit there in a state of numbness because everything else just got sucked away. That's a prime example of what this manifestation looks like. And then the last one that I'm going to mention here regarding the bad manifestations are sores. With sores, this is an aftermath effect. Even if things feel stable, feel good, if you feel like everything's great, if you have a sore, It's identified by simply just thinking about the subject and then realizing you start getting attacks, intimidations, and then it opens up more doors for fears and other attacks. Whether you think about it or whether someone else brings it up, if it's a sore subject, all of a sudden you have the irritation and the flare-up spiritually and mentally. But if it's not brought up, you're perfectly fine. So these are all the bad manifestations that Jesus has showed me. There's probably more. I'm not going to sit here and say this is an extensive list and this is everything there is. One thing I'll point out before getting to the final point on this is that you notice that none of these are actually directly sin in themselves. These are all little things that can happen that lead us to have a shift in mindset, a shift in attitude, and then Satan capitalizes on these because it leads us into being in a mindset of fear, self-preservation, or greed, or thinking of ourselves. It leads us to sink into this mindset, and then Satan then tempts us to sin by answering or fixing this problem through the wrong means. So wherever you identify things like this, if you can notice there's been a change in your disposition, go back to Jesus and say, okay, Jesus, where am I missing the truth here? Okay, Jesus, am I believing a lie? Is there something wrong with my mindset? Am I not applying the armor of God properly in this area of my life? The point in all this is so that you can stay in a state of peace. We're to generally be at peace at all times. The attacks that I just mentioned and things like these are indicators that our peace is being compromised, and we just simply need to go back to Jesus before things get worse. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't share all this for you to memorize. This isn't for you to sit here, study, and get it all down packed. It's more about learning to discern when something spiritual has hit you and going back to Jesus about it to maintain your armor and your attitude. What I listed here are some examples of things that happen that you can start off with to check with Jesus and move on from there. If you can identify fear and nip it as soon as it starts, you're not going to be led into sin. The video that I have set up, which comes in the Sin and Law playlist, it's going to go through the scriptures and talk about people who fell into fear and then ended up going into sin. And I'll give you two examples right now that are in the beginning in the book of Genesis. There's Eve, and I'm also going to talk about Cain. Eve ended up eating the fruit, not because the serpent told her to. If you go back and check the account, the serpent never told Eve, eat from this tree. What the serpent did was cause Eve to doubt God. Eve was supposed to trust God. She was supposed to put her faith in his words. The serpent caused Eve to doubt God, and therefore, she then operated in a spirit of fear. And the fear that she was operating in was that God could not be trusted and God was withholding wisdom from her. And the answer was, in order to truly be like God and get wisdom, she had to do the opposite of what God said. It was fear that the serpent planted into her mind. We never actually hear anyone say to Eve, eat from the tree. The reason for this is because it was actually Satan, the spirit now, who spoke into Eve's mind using her desires to lead her to actually eat the fruit. He came to her through using her desires and her flesh to lead her to eat the fruit. The serpent planted the doubt and the fear, but it was actually the enemy, Satan, through her mind, through her senses, that actually tempted her to actually take the fruit and eat it. Another example of fear being planted before the sin came is with Cain. Cain was afraid of Abel because Abel's offering was accepted by God and Cain's was rejected. And therefore, the answer that Cain got to solve this fear and solve this problem that he had with his brother was to kill his brother. And it's ironic because if you look at the scriptures, Saul had the exact same issue with David. The scriptures literally said that Saul was afraid of David, just as he tried to kill him with a javelin. So those are two, / kind of three, threw another one in there as a reference to the second one. Those are some examples of how fear came before the sin. We as Christians, we really do need to learn how to identify fear in our life because that really is where the battle starts. It's where it all begins. This is why the scripture says that perfect love drives out fear. and that there's no fear in love. And we're supposed to be abiding in the love of God, and if that's the case, then there should be no fear in us whatsoever. So hopefully this video was edifying and helps people out there with identifying fear and beginning to overcome certain things, and even just mindsets and attitudes and plaguing oppressive thoughts and stuff like that that rises up within us and that we get attacked with. Hopefully this will help you out. The next video is going to be a video concerning faith in Jesus. And this is going to be talking about a much higher level than just simply having faith that he's going to do something for you, which I'm also going to bring up in that video. But this video is going to be more so catered towards a higher level of faith in Jesus that I didn't even realize was even possible. Not to say that I doubted that this was the case, it's just I never really thought that I'd ever actually have to practice this. And it's what I've been talking about before regarding a season of my life, which is still now, where I can't even trust my own memory. I literally have to trust Jesus to reveal and show me all things. And this is some processing that myself and my family had gone through in learning how to love one another and to stay in peace with one another and keep harmony in times of trial and when demons have been trying to rip away and tear us apart. And it really is having our confidence and trust in Jesus more so than ourselves, our memories, and our own ways of thinking.